China can threaten the UK in this way, or a Chinese company, I'm not saying the government, then I think other countries will be feeling very vulnerable for that. I think we need China for not just for trade, but we are getting to a new global environment, if you like, architecture at the moment, where we've got these big, I have to say, men running countries, China, Russia, America, where the personalities of those countries are almost sort of sizing up each other, and it feels a bit like the old big game, if you like,
So it's
of
the battle of the
playing.
strong men, is it?
Yeah, it does feel like that.
Baroness Hayter, let's come to you on this first of all. Were we naive in allowing China to buy the last two of something, the last two blast furnaces? Not for commercialism, not for profit, as our guests have been saying, but purely so that China can have a hand in the UK?
Well, clearly we didn't do the work at that time. It was before my party was in government, so I don't know the detail of what scrutiny was done at that time, but it seems that it should have been rather robust, more robust, and a good sort of risk assessment would have said, well, what if they want to suddenly pull out, not necessarily for sabotage, but simply they wanted to put their money elsewhere. Where would that leave us? And I'm not sure that was done at the time, and there was the mitigation should that happen. I mean, I don't know whether this has been a deliberate sabotage or whether it's been a commercial move by the Chinese, but either way, it seems that we had not got the proper risk assessment for what if any overseas investor suddenly pulls out in something where a supply chain is so crucial to the future of it. This is, as we now learn, as you said earlier, we've all become rather expert, haven't we? That if you stop this production, it doesn't restart. And I would have thought that anyone putting a big investment into any single hands that with something that is so time sensitive that the lack of supply chains would close the whole thing down should have been rather more robust.
Yeah. I mean, does it even require that much of a deep dive, Jerry, to ask why China would want to buy the last two blast furnaces? They're very capable of producing steel. They sell it to us at much less than it costs to produce steel from the Scunthorpe Steelworks. I mean, it's a pretty basic thing, isn't it? Pretty basic common assumption that China wouldn't be buying these steelworks for profit. They'd just be buying them to hedge their positions, I suppose, within UK industry, influence within UK industry.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. Case. It's what economists sort of call a sort of predatory pricing or predatory behavior by a company when they don't obviously have a particular sort of profit motive for whatever they're doing with this business and the steel that it's supposed to be producing. The larger picture to me here, Kate, is a striking and useful reminder, if I may say so. I don't want to sound too sort of negative here, but just of how difficult the kind of the broader international picture is at the moment. You would think that given the way in which the Trump administration has been behaving towards Europe, towards pretty well every country in the world, actually, except Russia, for the last 2 months, you would sort of think that the Chinese would be quite keen to burnish their own reputation and their own credentials as a potential economic ally. They are very important economic partners with many European countries, including the UK, things like this, but also in terms of exports and everything else. And making the case that, actually they could be the friend of Europe, and at least to kind of complicate the European picture. But this kind of behavior, and you can add to that, this extraordinary story we had at the weekend of them, refusing to let in a that British MP, I think it was, wasn't it, who was going to visit into Hong Kong.
We're a Hong Kong. Yeah.
And let's not forget they are Russia's close ally without limits. So it's just, to me, it just shows it's a little bit puzzling in terms of the way economic diplomacy here is not being handled all that well by the Chinese. But on the other hand, if you want to look at it from the other side of the coin, just a very powerful reminder of how frankly, how unfriendly China is going to be in terms of whatever the Europeans may want to do. I've spent a lot of time in Europe, as you know, Kate, in the last few months, and I've been to a lot of events where Chinese have been sort of standing and talking and saying, we can be Europe's friend. China's, US is abandoning you. You've got a great economic relationship with us. We don't have any kind of territorial ambitions in Europe or anything like that. And they seem here with this example just to be reminding us that actually they see Europe largely in a kind of predatory way. They're not going to win any friends at a time when Europe, frankly, is rather eagerly looking for friends.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, Dianne, because doesn't the UK need China for economic growth? China could contribute to economic growth within this country. That is a fact, but yet they're not interested in helping us with economic growth. They're interested in being a stakeholder instead. So should we just avoid them completely? I mean, I think, sorry to interject slightly, but Jerry, the UK has much more reliance on China than the United States does, right?
Yeah, I would. Well, I'm not sure about that, actually. I mean, in terms of the US, I mean,
perhaps not in terms of goods.
Yeah,
but
not
in terms of the Chinese are woven into our water, so much of our industry, and obviously Trump is addressing the issue of the reliance the US has on China. He might not be going about it the right way, but he's very aware of it, and he wants to reassert power. Whereas Baroness Hayter, don't we walk a trickier line here? We need China for UK economic growth. We're all saying, well, we should have thought more carefully about giving them ownership of the last 2 blast furnaces when they probably don't need them for profit. We just happily sign them over. But China's interwoven in so much of our industry.
It is, and I mean, there are a couple of issues. One, can I just agree with what Jerry, I think, was hinting at? I mean, it seems to me unlikely that this is a diplomatic sabotage. It would seem very unlikely, given the ramifications the Chinese government would want to set out to do such an obvious thing. It was, became physically clear very quickly. Any sort of questioning of our cyber that they produce or help us with isn't as obvious, but if I was advising them, I certainly wouldn't try and stop something where the television cameras can actually show the blast furnace, so to speak. So I'm not sure there's evidence of that. I'll tell you something that really worries me, and it is in a way that global thing, because there are other countries who will be watching this who are far more vulnerable than the UK is. When I was in Sri Lanka, I saw the amount that China had put into building a new port and new airport there, and there are other developing countries where they've put in massive stuff, sometimes on loans on high interest rates. And if I was those countries, I'd be even more worried about the impact on not just their infrastructure, but therefore their democracy as well, by having such big loans and big providers from China. If China can threaten the UK in this way, or a Chinese company, I'm not saying the government, then I think other countries will be feeling very vulnerable from that. I think we need China for not just for trade, but we are getting to a new global environment, if you like, architecture at the moment, where we've got these big, I have to say, men running countries, China, Russia, America, where the personalities of those countries are almost sort of sizing up each other, and it feels a bit like the old big game, if you like.
So it's the battle of the strong men, is it?
Yeah, it does feel like that.